There are some faces we remember for reasons we cannot explain. Faces that appear briefly in our lives and somehow remain with us long after countless others have faded away. A stranger sitting across from you on a train, a woman passing beneath an umbrella during a storm, someone you never truly knew, yet somehow never forgot. For me, that face belonged to an old woman on a bus, a woman who always sat in the very last seat, a woman who seemed to appear from nowhere, and who would eventually change my life forever. My name is Emily Carter. When this happened, I was 21 years old and studying literature at the University of Edinburgh. I had always loved stories, not because they offered escape, but because they helped me understand people, their fears, their hopes, their loneliness. Perhaps that's why I noticed her when nobody else seemed to. At the time, life was simple, busy, but simple. I attended classes during the day and worked evenings at a small independent bookshop tucked away in one of Edinburgh's older streets. The shop was beautiful. Dusty wooden shelves, narrow aisles, the smell of old paper lingering permanently in the air. Most nights I didn't finish until nearly 11. By then the city felt entirely different from the Edinburgh tourists usually saw. The crowds disappeared, the laughter faded, the ancient streets became quieter, older, as though centuries of history emerged from the shadows after dark. To get home I always took the last bus. The route crossed several districts before reaching the quieter residential area where I rented a small flat. The journey lasted around 30 minutes, long enough to read, long enough to think, long enough to watch strangers disappear into the night. At first I didn't notice anything unusual. The same driver, the same route, the same collection of tired passengers heading home after long days. Then one evening I saw her, an elderly woman sitting alone in the final row. She couldn't have been younger than 75, perhaps older. Her gray coat looked old-fashioned, the kind of coat people rarely wore anymore. A dark wool hat covered most of her silver hair. Her hands rested quietly in her lap, and she stared out the window as though searching for something beyond the city lights. There was nothing particularly strange about her, at least not at first. Old people take buses, people sit alone, people stare out windows. Nothing unusual, yet something about her stayed in my mind. Perhaps it was the sadness in her eyes, or perhaps it was the way she seemed completely detached from everyone around her, like a visitor from another time. The next night she was there again. Same seat, same coat, same distant expression. I remember noticing it only because I happened to glance toward the back of the bus while putting away my headphones. There she was, watching the darkness beyond the glass, motionless, silent. The sight triggered a strange sense of familiarity, as though I had expected to see her. The third night she appeared again, and the fourth, and the fifth. Eventually I began looking for her every evening. Not intentionally, not at first, yet the habit formed naturally. I would board the bus, scan the rows, and there she would be, always sitting in the last seat, always alone, always watching the night. Weeks passed. The routine never changed. What fascinated me wasn't simply her presence. It was the consistency. People's routines vary. Some nights they stay home, some nights they leave early. Life interrupts patterns. Yet the old woman seemed immune to all of that. Rain, wind, cold, nothing kept her away. She appeared every single night, without fail. The more I noticed her, the more questions emerged. Where did she board? Where did she live? Why did she never seem to speak with anyone? And most importantly, why did I never see her leave? That was the strangest detail. I often stayed on the bus until nearly the end of the route. Not once did I see her stand up. Not once did I see her move toward the door. Yet eventually she would simply be gone. At first I assumed I had missed it while reading. A simple explanation. But after several weeks, I became certain something wasn't adding up. One rainy Thursday evening curiosity finally overcame me. The bus was nearly empty. Only 4 passengers remained. A student asleep near the front, a man staring at his phone, an elderly couple quietly talking, and the woman in the last row. I closed my book, walked toward the rear of the bus, and sat 2 seats away from her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain drummed softly against the windows. Streetlights drifted past like golden reflections. The woman continued looking outside. Then slowly she turned her head toward me. Her eyes surprised me. They weren't frightening, Nor were they cold. They were kind. Extraordinarily kind. Yet beneath that kindness lay something else. A sadness so profound it almost hurt to look at. Without thinking, I smiled. A small, polite smile. The kind strangers exchange every day. To my surprise, she smiled back. The transformation was immediate. For a brief moment, she seemed younger, warmer, almost familiar. I don't know why, but the gesture filled me with unexpected comfort, as though I had just greeted an old friend. Neither of us said anything. The silence wasn't awkward. It felt natural, peaceful. After a few moments, she returned her attention to the window. And somehow, that was enough. The following evening, I found myself smiling before I even reached the bus stop. The realization felt ridiculous. Why was I excited to see a stranger? Yet I was. When I boarded there, she sat, waiting in the last row. For the first time, I waved. A tiny gesture. Nothing more. Again, she smiled. Again, that strange feeling of comfort settled over me. Over the next few weeks, our silent routine continued. A smile, a nod, occasionally a wave. Nothing more. Yet somehow those tiny interactions became the most comforting part of my day. Life can be surprisingly lonely in your 20s. Nobody warns you about that. People assume youth is filled with friendships and excitement. Sometimes it is. Other times it's late shifts, empty apartments, and the quiet realization that adulthood isn't nearly as simple as you imagined. Perhaps that's why her presence mattered. She expected nothing, asked nothing, yet somehow made the journey home feel less lonely. As winter approached, the nights grew darker, colder. The city seemed wrapped permanently in mist and rain. Christmas lights appeared across Edinburgh, warm colors reflected across wet streets. The bus journeys became quieter than ever. One evening, while watching snowflakes drift past the window, I looked toward the last row. The woman was already looking at me, not smiling, just watching. Something about her expression felt different, concerned, worried. For a brief moment, an uncomfortable feeling settled in my stomach, a feeling I couldn't explain. The woman quickly looked away, returning her attention to the darkness outside. I told myself I was imagining things, yet the image remained. The concern in her eyes, the strange tension in her face, as though she wanted to say something, as though she was waiting for the right moment. Outside, the bus continued through the sleeping city. The streets grew emptier, the darkness deeper, and although I couldn't possibly know it then, that winter night marked the beginning of something far stranger than I could ever have imagined. Because very soon the woman in the last seat would finally speak to me, and when she did, everything would change. Winter arrived quietly in Edinburgh. Not with dramatic snowstorms or frozen rivers, but through shorter days, longer shadows, and a coldness that seemed to settle permanently beneath the skin. By early December, darkness covered the city before most people finished work. The old streets glistened beneath rain-soaked streetlights. Ancient buildings emerged from the fog like memories, refusing to disappear. And every night after closing the bookshop, I still took the same bus home, the same route, the same driver, the same final journey through the sleeping city, and always, the same woman. The woman in the last seat. Our silent routine had become strangely important to me. I never admitted that to anyone. How could I? The idea sounded ridiculous. A 21-year-old university student finding comfort in exchanging smiles with a stranger. Yet that was exactly what had happened. Sometimes after difficult days, her presence felt oddly reassuring, as though simply seeing her meant the world was still behaving as expected. There she would be, waiting quietly at the back, watching the darkness pass beyond the window. For several weeks, nothing changed, until the night she finally spoke. The evening began like any other. Rain drifted across Edinburgh in thin silver lines. The wind moved through narrow streets with a low, mournful sound. By the time I locked the bookshop door, the city felt unusually empty. Most people had chosen to stay indoors. Only a handful of pedestrians moved through the cold. I remember feeling exhausted. University assignments were piling up. Work had been stressful. Sleep seemed increasingly difficult to find. All I wanted was to get home. The bus arrived almost 5 minutes late. Its headlights emerged slowly through the fog. I climbed aboard and nodded politely to the driver, then instinctively looked toward the back. She was there, but immediately something felt different. The woman wasn't staring out the window. She was looking directly at me. Her expression stopped me in my tracks. Concern. Not mild concern. Not curiosity. Genuine worry. The kind you might see on the face of a parent searching for their child. For a moment, I almost asked if she was all right. Instead, I simply smiled. She did not smile back. The realization unsettled me. I sat several rows ahead, trying to ignore the uncomfortable feeling growing in my chest. The bus continued through the city. Passengers gradually disappeared at various stops, one by one, until eventually only 3 people remained. Myself, the driver, and the woman. Outside, rain intensified. Water raced down the windows in shimmering patterns. Streetlights became distorted golden blurs. The atmosphere inside the bus felt strangely isolated, as though the rest of the world had vanished. At some point, I noticed the woman still watching me. The same worried expression remained. I glanced away, then back again. She hadn't moved. My stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. I couldn't explain why. The feeling simply existed. Persistent, heavy. The bus turned onto the road leading toward my usual stop. Only a few minutes remained before I would get off and walk the final distance home. Normally I enjoyed that walk. The route passed through quiet residential streets, lined with old stone buildings. Safe, familiar, comforting. Yet that night, for reasons I couldn't understand, the thought filled me with unease. The bus slowed as it approached the stop before mine. Nobody boarded. Nobody left. The vehicle continued forward. Then, something happened that I had never seen before. The woman stood up. For several seconds, I simply stared. Because in all the weeks I'd known her, she had never moved from that seat. Not once. Now she was walking slowly down the aisle. Toward me. My heart began beating faster. The bus felt suddenly silent. The only sound came from rain striking the roof. The woman stopped beside my seat. Up close, she looked older than I had realized. Her face carried the marks of many difficult years. Yet her eyes remained gentle, kind, familiar. For a moment she seemed uncertain, as though searching for the right words. Then finally she spoke. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "Don't get off tonight." I froze. The words seemed strangely out of place, almost dreamlike. I stared at her, certain I had misunderstood. What? The woman glanced briefly toward the dark window, then back at me. Her expression grew even more serious. "Don't get off tonight." The same sentence, the same quiet urgency. My mouth opened. Questions rushed through my mind. Why? What did she mean? Was someone waiting for me? How could she possibly know? But before I could ask anything, she turned around, walked calmly back toward the final row, and sat down. Just like that. The conversation was over. I remained frozen. The bus continued moving. The rain continued falling. Nothing else happened. Yet my entire world suddenly felt different. My stop approached. Closer. Closer. The familiar street appeared ahead. The driver activated the indicator. The bus slowed. My pulse quickened. This was ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. A stranger had told me not to get off. That was all. No explanation. No evidence. No reason. Every logical part of my mind insisted I ignore her. And yet, I couldn't. Something about her voice lingered. Something about her expression. The fear in her eyes. The sincerity. The certainty. The bus reached my stop. The doors opened. Cold rain swept inside. I remained seated. Several seconds passed. The driver glanced toward me in the mirror, waiting. I shook my head slightly. The doors closed. The bus pulled away. Almost immediately, relief and confusion collided inside me. What was I doing? Why had I listened? The city continued passing outside. I looked toward the last row. The woman sat exactly where she always had, calm, silent, watching the darkness. For the first time since she spoke, she smiled. A small smile, gentle, grateful. Then she looked away. The bus continued for another several minutes before turning onto a road that overlooked part of the neighborhood where I lived. From that position, I could see flashing blue lights in the distance. Police vehicles, several of them. My curiosity immediately returned. The lights appeared unusually close to my usual stop. The bus passed nearer. I saw police tape, ambulances, officers moving through the rain. The sight unsettled me. Deeply. Something serious had happened. The following morning, Edinburgh woke beneath gray skies. News spread quickly. By lunchtime, everyone was discussing it. A violent robbery had occurred the previous night, near a residential bus stop. A young woman walking home alone had been attacked. The timing stopped my heart. The location was worse. It happened less than 200 meters from where I normally got off the bus. At almost the exact time I would have been walking there. I read the article 3 times. Then, a fourth. Each reading left me colder. Because no matter how I tried to avoid the conclusion, the same thought returned. If I had left the bus, I would have been there. The realization haunted me. All day. All evening. Even while working. Questions filled my mind. How could the woman have known? Was it coincidence, luck, a random warning that happened to be correct? Nothing made sense. That night, as I boarded the bus again, my heart pounded harder than usual. Part of me desperately wanted answers. Part of me feared them. I immediately looked toward the back. The last seat was occupied. The woman sat there, exactly as always. The same gray coat, the same hat, the same gentle eyes, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she smiled softly, the same smile she had given me weeks earlier. Yet now it carried a different meaning. Because somewhere deep inside, I had begun to understand something impossible. The woman hadn't simply warned me, she had saved me. And although I couldn't yet explain how, I knew with absolute certainty that my life would never be the same again, because the real mystery was only beginning. And very soon I would discover something far stranger than a warning on a rainy winter night. I would discover that the woman in the last seat might never have been there at all. For the next several days I couldn't stop thinking about the woman. Everything else in my life continued as normal. Classes, assignments, work at the bookshop, coffee with friends. Yet beneath every ordinary moment lingered the same question. Who was she? And how had she known? The image of her face returned constantly. The sadness in her eyes. The quiet urgency in her voice. The way she had looked at me before saying those 4 simple words. Don't get off tonight. I replayed the memory endlessly. Searching for details I might have missed. Searching for some logical explanation. But none came. A week passed. Then another. Every night I continued taking the last bus home. Every night she remained in the last row. The routine continued almost exactly as before, except now there was an invisible tension between us. A secret, an unanswered question. Sometimes I caught her watching me. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she simply looked out into the darkness. And somehow I found myself growing increasingly attached to her presence. It sounds strange to say that. She was still a stranger. I didn't know her name, didn't know where she lived, didn't know anything about her life. Yet I felt connected to her in a way I couldn't explain. Perhaps because she had saved me, or perhaps because loneliness recognizes loneliness. One cold January evening, curiosity finally overcame fear. The bus was nearly empty. Only a handful of passengers remained. The woman sat in her usual place. I gathered my courage and walked toward the back. This time I sat directly beside her. For several moments neither of us spoke. The city drifted past outside. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Finally I turned toward her. Thank you. The words emerged quietly. The woman looked at me. A faint smile appeared. For what? The question surprised me. I stared at her. You know. The smile faded slightly. Then she looked out the window again, as though she already understood. As though no explanation was necessary. After a long silence, I asked another question. How did you know? The woman remained quiet. Several seconds passed. Then she answered. Sometimes people see danger because they've lived through it before. A chill moved through me. I wasn't sure what the words meant. Before I could ask more, the bus slowed for the next stop. When I turned back toward her, she was gone. I blinked, confused. The seat beside me sat empty. The entire rear section of the bus was empty. My heart skipped. I immediately stood up, looked toward the front. Nothing. No sign of her. No movement, no gray coat, no wool hat, nothing. It made no sense. She couldn't have disappeared. Not that quickly. Not without passing me. Yet she was simply gone. That night I barely slept. and for the first time since meeting her, fear began replacing curiosity. The next evening, I decided to speak with the driver, the same driver who had worked the route for months, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and an endless supply of patience. As I boarded, I waited until the other passengers had taken their seats. Then I approached him. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded. "Sure." I hesitated. Suddenly the question felt ridiculous. Still, I asked it. "The elderly woman who always sits in the last row." The driver frowned. "What elderly woman?" I laughed nervously. "The one with the gray coat." His expression remained unchanged. "I don't know who you mean." I stared at him, certain he was joking, but he wasn't smiling. "I'm serious." "So am I." He shook his head. "There isn't any elderly woman." The answer unsettled me immediately. "She's here almost every night." "No." The driver looked genuinely confused. "Most nights, you're the only regular passenger I recognize." I felt my stomach tighten. "That's impossible." He studied me for a moment, then shrugged. "Sorry." The conversation ended there, but the discomfort remained. That night, the woman was back in the last row, exactly where she always sat, exactly as though nothing had happened. I almost ran toward her, yet when I reached the back, she simply smiled, a calm, gentle smile, the kind that somehow discouraged questions. I returned to my seat more confused than ever. The following week, I decided to go further. I contacted the bus company. After several phone calls and far more persistence than I probably should have shown, I managed to arrange something unusual. They agreed to let me view security footage from one of the nights. Not because they believed my story, but because they wanted to reassure me. The footage arrived 2 days later. I watched it alone in my apartment. Rain tapped softly against the windows. My hands trembled slightly as I pressed play. The camera showed the interior of the bus. Passengers boarding. Passengers leaving. Normal. Ordinary. Then I saw myself, sitting in my usual seat, reading, looking toward the back, smiling, waving, talking to someone, except there was nobody there. The last row was empty, completely empty. Every single time, I froze. The recording continued. I watched myself walk toward the back, sit beside an empty seat, smile, speak, then return to my place. The seat never changed. No woman appeared, not once. I watched the footage 3 times, then a 4th. The result remained the same. I was alone. The realization terrified me. Had I imagined everything? Was grief, stress, exhaustion, creating an elaborate illusion? I wanted to believe that. I truly did, because the alternative felt impossible. Yet one fact remained. The woman had warned me, and the warning had saved me. No hallucination could explain that. Days later, while researching local history for a university project, I visited one of Edinburgh's older libraries. The building felt ancient, quiet, filled with the scent of aging paper. Hours passed as I searched through archives. Then, purely by accident, I found a newspaper article. The headline immediately caught my attention. It mentioned a robbery, 22 years earlier, near a bus stop. My bus stop. I felt a sudden chill. Slowly, I began reading. According to the article, an elderly woman had been attacked while walking home late at night. The injuries proved fatal. The crime shocked the city. The woman had been well known in her community. A retired school teacher. Kind, generous, loved by many. Beneath the article sat a photograph. The moment I saw it, my heart stopped. It was her. The same eyes, the same smile, the same face. The woman from the bus. I stared at the image for what felt like hours, unable to move, unable to think. The date beneath the photograph confirmed everything. She had died more than 20 years earlier, yet somehow she had been sitting beside me every night. When I finally left the library, snow had begun falling. The city looked softer somehow, quieter, as though wrapped in a dream. That evening I boarded the bus once more. Part of me hoped to see her, part of me feared it. The journey felt longer than usual. The city drifted past outside. Passengers came and went. Eventually I gathered the courage to look toward the back. The last row was empty. My chest tightened. I waited. Nothing. The bus continued. Still nothing. Then, as we approached my stop, I noticed something resting on the seat where she always sat. A single white flower. Fresh, perfect, impossible. No one else seemed to notice it. Only me. For several moments, I simply stared. Then slowly, a smile spread across my face. Tears filled my eyes. Not from fear, not from sadness, from gratitude. Because somehow, I understood. The woman had stayed long enough to change a life. Long enough to prevent another tragedy. Long enough to give someone the chance she never received. The bus stopped. The doors opened. This time I stepped off. The night air felt cold against my face. Snow drifted through the streetlights. Behind me, the bus pulled away, disappearing into the darkness. I never saw her again. Years have passed since then. I graduated, built a career, moved to a different part of the city. Life continued. Yet every winter, when the nights grow long and buses travel through rain-soaked streets, I think about her, about kindness, about second chances, and about the woman who sat quietly in the last seat, the passenger who wasn't there, the stranger who saved my life, and who finally found peace after helping someone else avoid the same fate she once suffered herself.